Good morning. We are in Matthew chapters 8 and 9 this morning. We spent nearly 2 months in the Gospel of John, and now we're moving around the Gospels, looking at some miracles. And typically we have looked at one miracle per class. Today, we're going to look at 10. So that means we've got 4 minutes to spend on each, or no. We're gonna look at this cluster of miracles in Matthew chapters 8 and 9. Miracle after miracle after miracle. There are some breaks in between some of these, and we'll talk about that as well. 10 miracles, really, they can be grouped into 3 groups of 3. The extra miracle would be Jairus' daughter. You remember how Jesus started to go to Jairus' home, then he was interrupted by the woman with the hemorrhage, and then they continued on, and the child had died. So if you count those as 1, then you got 3 sets of 3, and really you should. It's just longer. All of these miracles in Matthew chapters 8 and 9 find their way in the other Gospels, or very similar ones are found. But if you look at Matthew 8 and 9, if you just look at these 2 chapters, if you haven't lately, you'll see there's a lot of miracles. We're going to try to think about why. Why are there so many miracles clustered together in these 2 chapters? And I'll give you the basic idea here is Matthew has not arranged his gospel chronologically. For the most part, things are chronological. But Matthew has intentionally grouped these miracles together topically. Scholars, as they look at all 4 Gospels, try to figure out, hey, what's going on here? And in light of the other Gospels, it seems that Mark and Luke and John are, for the most part, chronologically arranged. You've got Luke's major section in chapters 10 through 19, that is very different from the rest of the gospel. It was Jesus' journey to Jerusalem, and it does have some topical arrangement as well. We might have a problem with that. So, well, what? Matthew's not chronologically arranged? But that's not something that was a problem for first century folks. Reading a narrative, this series of accounts about Jesus' life, because it's not just about a biography of Jesus, it's also about his teachings. And as we have emphasized in our study, the miracles served as teaching tools. So what is it that we're going to try to figure out in this? We're going to see. James, I just realized I didn't transfer the fonts to that computer. It's too late for this morning. Hopefully it'll be readable enough. But that's why I've got a little font problem there. But if you look at the very first miracle, it says that Jesus came down from the mountain. Great crowds followed him. What mountain? What is this talking about? When he came down from the mountain. This is Matthew 8, verse 1. What happened in Matthew 5 through 7? The Sermon on the Mount. So you have this major teaching discourse. And if you recall from our study on the Sermon on the Mount that we did on Sunday mornings a while back, we talked about how Matthew's gospel has 5 major discourses, and the Sermon on the Mount is the first one. On the heels of that, you have these miracles. Matthew 5 through 7 is Jesus' definitive teaching on the law, where he says, you have heard that it was said, but I say to you. And he's saying at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. This is a major discourse. We all love the Sermon on the Mount. It is a pivotal first major discourse. Matthew 8 and 9 are also extremely important. And we're going to be looking at this passage this morning. The very first miracle tells us about Jesus healing a leper. And why don't we just start there, verses 2 through 4. Behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing. Be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded for proof to them. Wait a minute. I thought there in verse 4, you've got Jesus talking about the regulations of the law of Moses, but in the Sermon on the Mount, he kind of said, we're not going to follow the law of Moses. Is that true? Am I stating that correctly? No, Jesus was a good Jew under the Mosaic law. Now he's going to take that law out of the way when he inaugurates his new covenant at his death and resurrection. But Jesus is telling this man, you're under the law of Moses, you have been healed, you need to make it official, you need to go to the priest and be declared clean. We don't talk about that just a whole lot. But notice what happens when Jesus touches this man. His leprosy immediately goes away, it's gone. Whenever people saw lepers, what was their response? Ah, I like that. Ah. What were lepers supposed to do as they approached people? Yell out, I'm a leper, I'm coming. We're familiar with that. Maybe we can sympathize with them a little bit right now. I don't have a mask on, go away, stay away. We're having to socially distance. Well, they did all the time, and it was horrible. But it's interesting to me that it says Jesus touched him. When's the last time this man ever received a touch from someone? And we talk about leprosy deadening the nerves. Maybe even if he did receive a touch, he might not have been able to feel it. What do you think about this miracle? This leprosy. Does Jesus ever heal other lepers? He does. As a matter of fact, next week we're going to look at Luke's account of Jesus healing 10 lepers at one time. And then the one leper who came back and thanked him. And so Jesus asked, where are the 9? This miracle gets things started. But I want you to notice also this. In verse 1 of Matthew 8, it says, great crowds followed him. This miracle, do you think it was in front of a crowd of folks? So what was the purpose of this miracle? One, it helped this guy who was a leper. But what else? It showed the power of Jesus. Did the leprosy heal over time? Did he say, hey, you just keep using your medication and eventually it's instantaneous. And that is really beautiful. So Jesus comes down from the mountain and great crowds followed him. I want you to notice with me here in Matthew chapters 8 and 9, we have the repeating of that verb, following. Great crowds followed him. Verse 10 will say that he marveled, and those who followed him are going to respond as well. Or Jesus is telling them something. You see it again where a scribe comes up to Jesus in verse 19 and says, I will follow you wherever you go. Verse 22, Jesus says to another disciple, follow me. And you see this again and again, the disciples of Jesus following him as they get into a boat and cross the Sea of Galilee. And we continue on into chapter 9, and there are 3 more instances of the verb being used. He says to Matthew, the tax collector who becomes one of his apostles, follow me. And what did Matthew do? He followed him. Jesus rose and followed him. That may not be that significant of a use here, because it's got Jesus following Jairus, or the people coming to represent Jairus, and going with his disciples. And then finally in verse 27, two blind men followed him. Why is that verb used so often? Is it a coincidence, do you think? Or is Matthew trying to emphasize something? Yes, ma'am. Okay, so we need to follow Christ just like these early disciples did. And we need to know some things about Jesus that will help us understand who he is and what he came to do. As we go through these together, I want us to think about the importance of this concept of following Jesus. And this comes on the heels of the Sermon on the Mount. This section, Matthew chapters 8 and 9, are bound with the Sermon on the Mount. And I'm going to show you that to you as well. You know, each of these Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're writing about the same person, a lot of the same events, but from very different perspectives, and they arrange their material differently. And it is useful, it is helpful to look at each Gospel in light of itself. Let's think about that. Matthew 4, verse 23 makes this statement, that he, that is Jesus, of course, he went throughout all Galilee. And you can see I've got it highlighted up there. I hope you can see the red text in contrast with the black. Because all those red words are going to parallel another verse that we're going to look at as well. I'll go ahead and put it on the screen. And I forgot to transfer my pretty font, and that's why these things are messing up. It's one thing to put it on a computer, it's another thing to actually install it. And I forgot. Matthew 4, verse 23 is extremely similar to Matthew 9, verse 35. Now, so far, we've just looked at one of these 10 miracles. But this is important. This is really an important part of our understanding of this cluster of miracles. So you can look in your Bible and you can see verses 23 through 25. And notice there the verb that is used in verse 25. Great crowds followed him. Verse 23, he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. What is that describing? His miraculous activity. There are two participles here. He says that Jesus went throughout all Galilee. What was he doing? Number one, he was teaching. And number two, it also says he was proclaiming. And we'll link that with teaching. But he was also healing. Matthew chapters 5 through 7. We're here at the end of chapter 4. Matthew chapters 5 through 7 would be Jesus teaching. It would also be him proclaiming about the kingdom. And then chapters 8 and 9 are Jesus healing. Does that make sense? Then when you finish, in verse 25 again, the great crowds are following him. Then when you finish Matthew 5 through 7, chapter 8 verse 1 says, great crowds followed him, and you have the continuation of that verb. And then at the end of chapter 9 verse 35, Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. Didn't we just read that? What is Matthew 9 verse 35 doing? Why does it basically repeat Matthew 4 verse 23? Say that again. Bookending this as a section. What do we have in our Bibles? We have headings. We have large print that says, this is the beginning of a new section. Did they use that in the first century? Did they have headings? Did they have bold and underline and stuff like that? They didn't. That was not part of how they wrote. We have that, and I'm glad we do. And it makes you wonder, why didn't they? And part of it may be, I'm just theorizing here, but part of it may be because in that day and time, writing materials weren't cheap. it was hard to get your hands on it. So if you're wasting a bunch of white space with headings and whatnot, maybe that's a factor. I don't know, but that just wasn't the typical way that people put material out here. So let's read these closing verses of Matthew 9. We already read verse 35. I won't read it a third time. Verse 36, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. And that sets the stage now for the next discourse of Jesus. Matthew 5 through 7 is a discourse. Matthew 8 and 9 are a narrative about Jesus' activity. So you've got teaching, followed by stuff he did, healing. Okay, justification of his teaching. Showing people that he is, in fact, who he claims to be, the Son of God. So Jesus makes this bold speech, Matthew 5 through 7, to the Sermon on the Mount. What was the reaction of people? They said, oh, that's nice. That's good. No, what was their reaction at the end of Matthew 7? When they heard Jesus, they thought he was speaking with authority, not as the scribes and Pharisees, but with authority. He now is going to perform all these miracles and emphasizes he has authority. He is what he claims to be, the Son of God, because he has all these powers with which he is able to heal folks. And the miracles are never simply, wouldn't it be nice if it was simple? They're never simply just to help somebody out of a tough situation. They are always intended to teach. So the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7, comes right before this cluster of 10 miracles where Jesus demonstrates his power in words, and he demonstrates his power in these miracles. And that's what I want us to spend our time on. So I've got this chart here, and we're just going to leave that on the screen for the remainder of our time as we walk through these parables. Sometimes you'll see Matthew 8, 9 referred to as 10. I like this arrangement. You've got 3 sets of 3, and it's the first in unit 3 that sometimes is divided. You can see how long it is there. Matthew 9, 18 through 26, his interaction with Jairus' daughter, as well as another woman, and we'll look at that. So we got about 30 minutes left, and we've got 8 more miracles to go. So let's keep going. I think we have set the stage. Oh, by the way, I was going to show you this. These are section numbers where scholars have created what's called a gospel harmony. They'll take all 4 accounts and try to arrange them chronologically. And this is a reference system. They've got these various numbers. So Matthew 8, 1 through 4 is section 45. And what would you think would come next? Section 46. But then they go, well, wait a minute, Mark has it and Luke has it arranged differently. This incident with the healing of the centurion's servant occurs later. And I don't want you to memorize these numbers by any means. I'm just simply showing you that Matthew is considered to be out of order. Now you do see 45 and then 46. If the healing of the leper happened in Matthew 8, 1 through 4, and why isn't the healing of the paralytic right after it, if it didn't happen chronologically? That's what we want to think about. Why has Matthew arranged these in ways that aren't chronological? And these miracles occurred based on the gospel harmonies, trying to put this chronologically together. They occurred over nearly a year. All these different miracles. And you read this and you might get the impression, well, Jesus just performed these miracles one after another. That's not the case. Rather, they're clustered together. So let's go on to the next one, and you'll notice between each unit are a few verses. And that helps us to see that these are, in fact, units of three. 3 units of 3. What's going on in Matthew 8:18 through verse 22? It's not a miracle. What's the next one? Between Matthew 9, verse 9 and verse 17, does Jesus perform miracles? No. Those help break up these 3 units. So that's why I've broken them up this way. This is what Matthew is trying to help us see. You've got cluster of miracles, then some teaching. Cluster of miracles, then some interaction with Matthew and others. And there's an emphasis on, throughout these, an emphasis on following Jesus, following him. Let's look at the second miracle. After the healing of the leper, we are presented with the centurion who came forward and said he has a servant at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly. Verse 7. He said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. So let's look at, we'll go ahead and finish reading through verse 13. Let's look at Jesus' response. When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, truly I say to you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown out into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion Jesus said, go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment. There's a lot here, especially when we start talking about this celestial banquet that's going to take place one day, and you're going to have Abraham and Isaac and Jacob there. And who's going to be in a prominent position at that table? Jewish leaders. A guy like this, a centurion, is he a Jew or a Gentile? He is a Gentile. Wait a minute, Jesus isn't supposed to be helping Gentiles. He came to preach to the household of Israel, to interact with Jews. But we see him repeatedly having interactions with Gentiles. And what is it that's so special about this man's faith? Jesus is approached by the man. He says, I've got a servant at home. I need you to come. I've got a servant at home, and he's paralyzed and he's suffering terribly. And Jesus says, okay, let me drop everything and go. And the man says, no, don't come to my house. Why not? I'm not worthy. And 2, he has faith to believe that Jesus can do what? Heal him by just saying the word. Healing him from a distance. Now, we have seen other cases of Jesus healing from a distance, but it wasn't where the person wanting the healing said to Jesus, oh, no, you just stay. You just stay put. We looked recently at John 11. When Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus, he's preaching in Perea, across the Sea of Galilee, and what do they want Jesus to do? Come and heal Lazarus. Now, Jesus delays, doesn't get there in time. What could Jesus have done? Healed him from a distance. There was the example we looked at the end of John 4, where you've got, most likely a Gentile. He's some sort of official who works for Herod, translated different ways, but a royal official. And what does he want Jesus to do? This was in Capernaum, and he wanted Jesus to travel to Cana. And that was about 10, 15 mile round trip, or actually one way. And Jesus refused. And was the man happy about that? He wanted Jesus to come. But he didn't. And the man's faith was even stronger, because then he realized, this guy can heal from a distance. This is absolutely amazing. Well, we've got one more in this cluster, verses 14 through 17. When Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she rose and began to serve him. That evening, they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illnesses and bore our diseases. Okay, then you change gears in verses 18 through 22, and it's not a miracle. It's a teaching on following, actually. What do these three miracles then have in common? What binds them together? Why did Matthew put these three miracles together? In light of the context we're looking at, in light of all that is said in verses 1 through 17, especially verse 17. He heals a leper. He heals someone who's paralyzed from a distance. He heals people who were sick with fever and demon possession. He is fulfilling prophecy. Jesus is fulfilling what Isaiah said the Messiah was going to come and do. And he is going to heal us of our illnesses and our diseases. I heard... All right. I think that's exactly right. Yeah, and the centurion himself says, I'm not worthy. How do people feel about lepers? I mean, how would we feel about them? Get away, get away. The dregs of society, people like them. They obviously did something wrong that they would get leprosy. It's their fault somehow. God's punishing them. That goes into that whole mentality. The centurion. And Jesus flips that around and says, I haven't seen such great faith in all of Israel. The Jewish people have not exemplified the faith of this centurion. And yet he's an outcast. And then you've got these lowly people. Sometimes when people read verses 14 and 15, they think Jesus was just hungry. And he healed Peter's mother-in-law because what did she do right after the fever left her? She went in the kitchen and started working on supper. That's not what's going on. And then we also want to think about Peter having a mother-in-law. Wait a minute, I thought he was the first pope. He can't be married. How does Peter describe himself in 1 Peter 5? He says, I am a fellow elder. And what's one of the qualifications of an elder? Husband of one wife, which means he would have a mother-in-law. Peter was married. He had kids. This passage that's not the main point of this passage. But these are just some run-of-the-mill folks. Outcasts of society. And Jesus heals them. What kind of diseases did they have? Diseases that Isaiah said the Messiah would heal. You've got this paralytic. He can't walk. What does Isaiah say in passages like Isaiah 28, Isaiah 35, other places, Isaiah 42? Some of the healings that Jesus is going to do is going to cause the lame to walk, to leap like a deer. And that's in fact what you see in Acts 3. So there's a lot going on here. In fact, Matthew quotes from Isaiah a lot. Actually, Matthew, Mark, and Luke quote a lot from Isaiah. I won't take the time to look at that now. All right, let's look at the next section then. You have in verses 18 through 22, Jesus challenging people to follow him. Don't lose sight of that. Verses 23 through 27 is the first of Unit 2. Jesus calms a storm. And listen to the description of the storm. Behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. But Jesus, in contrast to the disciples who were panicking, it says, he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, "What sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" I'm hurrying just a little bit. What did Jesus do to the sea? He calmed it, but how? What did he do? He rebuked the sea. That's a pretty strong term. We know from Mark and Luke's accounts that Jesus said, "Peace, be still." Notice here, you have in the previous unit, Jesus praising the faith of the centurion, a non-Jew, a non-disciple of Jesus. And here are his own disciples who are in a boat in a horrible storm. Mark calls this a seismic storm. I mean, this was a demonic storm that just came out of nowhere. And they're terrified. At least 4 of these guys were fishermen on this very lake, the Sea of Galilee as it's called. They knew how dangerous this situation was. What was Jesus doing? Sleeping. And the disciples are terrified, and he rebukes them. When I read this, I go, yeah, they're scared, and they have every right to be scared. But Jesus says, no, you don't. You don't have a right to be scared. Why not? They're with him. They're with him. And he calmed the storm. All right, let's move on to the next one. You have the 2 men with demons healed. And you have a much longer account in Mark. This is just a few verses here, 28 through 34. Mark 5 has 21 verses dedicated to this incident. But you have Jesus going into the country of the Gadarenes or Gerasenes. This is Gentile territory. 2 demon-possessed men met him coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass by that way. And they start acknowledging Jesus as the Son of God, these demons do. And he cast the demons out. He cast them out. And then as a result, lots of people followed Jesus. Is that what verse 34 says? No, it's the exact opposite. It's the people begging Jesus to leave. Verses 9 through 1 of Matthew 9. They cross the sea, they come back to Jewish territory, and they bring a paralytic to him. And Jesus says, "Take heart, my son, I'm going to let you walk. Here, walk." Is that what Jesus does at first, there in verse 2? At first he says, "Your sins are forgiven." Let me go back to the numbering there. You see how early this one is, number 46. This is the one that chronologically would follow right after the healing of the leper, and that's based on Mark's account. Mark suggests that this happened much, much earlier, this particular incident. So why is it here after these other 2 miracles? Why is it grouped together with the calming of the demonic storm and the healing of the demon-possessed men? Well, now you've got this paralytic who was told to take up his bed, and he rose and went home, and the crowd saw it. When the crowd saw it, they were terrified. They were afraid, and they glorified God who had given such authority to men. So on the one hand, they're terrified at seeing this healing. They're afraid. Why are they afraid? Jesus just healed a guy who couldn't walk. Why are they afraid? And they're also glorifying God. I mean, what a big mix of emotions here. 2 extremes, I mean. Arlie, did you have a hand? Okay. Isn't that interesting? How we've got different translations to bring out the sense of some of these words. And I think that there is certainly the idea of being amazed at something, but there's also the idea of fear. This is otherworldly. This is amazing. Yes, ma'am.
If we could do that
That would be good or bad? So there's this, yeah. Okay. So there's some sense of, I don't want to mess with this guy, but yet at the same time, I do want him to help me. But they glorified God, who had given such authority to men. Such authority. The idea of authority. What authority does Jesus have here? He has all authority. Isn't that what Matthew 28 is going to say at the very end? All authority has been given to me. Maybe that's an important word in the Gospel of Matthew as well, where Jesus has power over demonic forces. And more than that, it's not just simply that, what would you say is the biggest miracle, biggest event in Matthew 9, 1 through 8? That the man couldn't walk and now he can? Is that the biggest? Your sins are forgiven. That's authority. When Jesus said something like that, and Mark's account tells us, the religious leaders who were there, what was their response? They started thinking in their heads, this guy Jesus, he's blaspheming. He is claiming to do something that only God can do. Was Jesus claiming to do something that only God could do? Yeah. And so what was Jesus claiming to be? God. He is able to cast out demons. That tells you right there, he has power. He has authority. And that's why these miracles have been clustered together. Then there's the break, verses 9 through 13. And it's about Jesus calling Matthew. And you continue to see the conflict between Jesus and the religious leaders in this incident. Look at verse 12. Jesus said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, quoting from 1 Samuel. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. So what did Jesus just do? He just forgave somebody of sin. Jesus has come to help people overcome demonic forces, but he's also come to help people be released from the demon himself, from Satan, by forgiveness of sins. And he's helping people to come out of that spiritual bondage. And then we continue with the teaching about fasting as Jesus is approached. And what he's saying is he's brought something new. I'm just going to summarize verses 14 through 17. Jesus has brought something that's new. You have the Jewish leadership, and they're old and dead. There's no life in them. And so Jesus says, I have come to put new wine into new wineskins, and I'm bringing something fresh and new. That's an insult to the religious leaders, certainly. We're running out of time. We've just got about 7 minutes or so to look at this last cluster. Verses 18 through 26 tell us about two miracles. Oh, and by the way, Unit 1, Miracle 2, Unit 2, Miracle 2, they all involve non-Jews, or each of them involve non-Jews. I don't know if that's a coincidence or what, but I forgot to mention that. 18 through 26, you've got Jesus going to the home of Jairus. We know from, well, it says there in verse 18, a ruler came in. And the way it's presented in Mark's account, representatives from Jairus come and pull Jesus back to his home. Jesus starts heading to his home, but it says in verse 20 that they're interrupted. Behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, for she said to herself, if I only touch his garment, I will be made well. So this woman has been unclean for 12 years, ceremonially unclean. No doubt that had a damper on her social life. She can't really interact with anybody. She's an outcast. And she demonstrates incredible faith, doesn't she? What does she do? Does she come up to Jesus and say, I know you can heal me, please heal me? She doesn't even do that. She just comes up behind him and touches the fringe of his cloak. And Mark has more detail where Jesus stops and says, who touched me? And the disciples say, huh? Well, you're surrounded by a crowd of folks and you're asking who touched you? You don't see that here. But you do see Jesus turning to the woman in verse 22. Seeing her, he said, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. He called her daughter. And instantly the woman was made well. When Jesus came to the ruler's house, he comes to Jairus' house. I guess Jairus isn't even named here, but we know his name from Mark's account. They came to Jesus' house. There were people there mourning and in commotion. And Jesus says, go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping. And what was their response? These professional mourners. Ha, 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 that's so funny, that's so funny. He put the crowd outside. He went in, and we know from the other accounts that he took mom and dad and a couple of his disciples into the room, and he revived the girl. He raised her from the dead. And the report about this went throughout all that district. It is not mentioned here, but how old was this little girl? She was 12. So the woman had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And then you've got this little girl. But while Mark mentions that, Matthew, I don't see it unless I'm just, I don't see that there. All right, and then verses 27 through 31, Jesus heals 2 blind men. So that first one we just looked at, we say there are 2 miracles there, but we're going to count it as 1 so that we'll have 3 units of 3 instead of 2 units of 3 and then 1 unit of 4. That doesn't sound as good. 27 through 31, the second miracle in this set. 2 blind men follow him. We used to have 2 demon-possessed men, but now we've got 2 blind men crying aloud, have mercy on us, Son of David. And so it's blind people now. So Jesus has already healed the lame. He's healed demon-possessed people. He's healed someone who was paralyzed from a distance. This is a wide range of miracles, isn't it? Jesus has also demonstrated by healing a paralytic that he can forgive sins. What is Matthew doing here? Why is he giving us this cluster of miracles, one after another, emphasizing in the teaching in between these units that Jesus has come to have people follow him. He is bringing something new, a new teaching, breathing new life into the teaching that the people need to obey. And he is able to overcome demons. And so he heals these 2 blind men. Is that characteristic of the Messiah as well? Is that something he was supposed to be able to do? Heal the blind? Well, we've already talked about that twice in our study. And then the last miracle, beginning of verse 32. This is important because it's also showing Jesus' power over the devil. As they were going away, behold, a demon-oppressed man who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke. And the crowds marveled, saying, never was anything seen like this. And the Pharisee said, he casts out demons by the prince of demons. Now we understand why Jesus has all this miraculous power. Because he is in league with the devil. What would you call that? Saying something like that is blasphemy. They're accusing Jesus of blasphemy. They have just committed blasphemy by saying the Son of God is in league with the devil. All right, I misspoke. I start working on the material that's coming up ahead. In 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at the 10 lepers. Next week, we're actually going to be looking at the follow-up to this incident in Matthew 12, where we have the so-called unpardonable sin. And you have the same accusation leveled against Jesus. So we'll pick up there next week. I'll remind you of how this ends. We're really out of time. But what do you think about Jesus and his miracle activity? Is there anything that he doesn't have control over? Is there anything he can't do? So he has all authority when it comes to teaching and proclaiming the kingdom of God and its arrival, and then also healing every disease. This Jesus is pretty impressive, isn't he? Yes, sir.
It just shows vividly that he came to do that which his Father said to do.
Right.
Then that he was sent.
He is doing what he was sent to do, what prophecy said he was going to do as the Messiah. What is our major takeaway from this? Jesus used these miracles to show what? He is God. He has all authority. And when you come to Matthew 28, after his resurrection, he is going to say, all authority has been given to me. He is making that declaration, and we see that played out here. Well, that was a quick survey of 10 miracles, and I hope that was helpful. Next week, we will look in Matthew 12, where Jesus talks about the unpardonable sin. And I think Ray's going to be teaching that instead of me, because I don't want to touch that. Oh, no. We will talk about the miracle and Jesus' teaching in Matthew 12 next week.